All right, so because this is the membership drive, I wanted to give a brief update of NCITE. So NCITE includes Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. Our membership includes engineers, planners, educators, researchers, and technicians. We're the local presence for international ITE. So if you sign up for international ITE and you live in Minnesota, North Dakota, or South Dakota, you get automatically enrolled into our section. Our membership, we have about 500 total members throughout Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota. About half is from the public sector and about half is from the private sector. About 90% almost are from Minnesota. The other 10%, 12% are from North Dakota and South Dakota. And internationally, we have 17,000 members, I think in 78 countries. Some section-wide events that we provide. We do section meetings like this where there's a technical presentation. We also do a summer social. And these are the pictures on here are some of the events from last year. And then we do an annual meeting at the end of the year. And then this year, we're also doing a conference type of event in October. We also have committees that plan technical presentations, roundtables, walking tours, biking tours, outreach events, and there's some pictures from a few of the committee events from last year. We have about 10 committees total. Our executive board, I think all of them are here today, besides maybe one or two. Reach out to us if you have any questions or if you'd like to get more involved with NCITE. We are currently looking for a co-chair for the Intersection Traffic Control Committee, so that might be one good way to get involved. So we have 8 total people on our executive board. So president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, 2 directors, a past president, and a section rep. This year, ITE and NCITE are offering planners free membership. So please pass that along to your colleagues. And then for NCITE updates, an ITE all members survey was sent out February 14th to help form the strategic plan for the next 3 years. So please fill that out if you got that. Our next section meeting will be in March, late March. It'll be the MnDOT traffic safety evaluations by Max Moreland and Mark Wagner. And that'll be, I believe it'll be March 29th. So watch out for that invite. We did just set up a sponsorship page on our website. So if you're interested in sponsoring and becoming a sponsor we actually have a sponsor for this section meeting, what we typically do. So if you're interested in that, please go to the website. There's a become a sponsor tab if you're interested. And then district awards are due March 1st. So that's coming up here. There's if you go to the Great Lakes District website, they have the descriptions for the awards on that. Otherwise, yeah, follow our website and LinkedIn and Twitter pages for other up-to-date information. So with that, I will pass it over to Cade to give the presenters introductions.
All right. Hi, everyone. So as I said earlier, my name is Cade. We have to switch computers here, so I'm going to give the introductions, and then we'll take maybe a minute just to make sure we get everything situated. So our presenters today are Casey Atkins and Derek Sundstrom. Casey Atkins is an engineer in Hennepin County's Transportation Planning Group focused on complete and green streets, long-range planning, transit coordination, and development review. Casey has a wide range of experience, including developing multimodal design guidance and policies, Vision Zero and safe routes to school plans, leading multimodal design trainings, and developing planning level through final design plans. Outside of work, Casey enjoys exploring the world through the eyes of her 6- and 3-year-old. And then Derek Sundstrom is Hennepin County's ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, Public Works Implementation Engineer in the Transportation Planning Division. His engineering career has included identifying ADA needs along corridors, planning level estimates for ADA work, developing preliminary and final design layouts and plans, and traffic modeling. In his role as ADA implementation engineer, he advocates for people with disabilities and makes sure that Hennepin County is meeting the needs of all users. Outside of work, Derek enjoys sports and traveling. All right, so as I said, we'll take just a minute here to get our computer switched over and then we'll get started.
My dad worked for the south of the hill. Just want to make sure you have it back. Go down, my dad said it down.
Microphone.
Right.
All right. It's okay. We're all, I was telling people, I'm like, I'm not used to being out of the house, so bear with me. I think we're all in the same boat, maybe. But thank you for coming out on this really snowy morning. I hope all of you noticed how impeccable Jack's sidewalk was cleared and the curb ramp on the side of the road at the intersection corner, because we're here to talk to you today about ADA. So I'm Casey Atkins. I'm an engineer, and this is Derek. We're both in transportation planning. And so we're also going to hit some topics for you transportation planners in the room as well, because we all have to work together in order to get our system to really work for everyone. Our topic today, Hennepin County is currently in the process of updating our ADA transition plan. And then we also wanted to share with you what we are doing right now for ADA and how we've kind of adjusted doing our project work for ADA. So a bit of history. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law way back in 1990. I'm not going to ask. I was alive in 1990, but I was pretty young. So from there, in 1991, the regulations went into effect. And in 1992, that's when ADA transition plans were required for every public entity with over 50 employees. If you're pausing to think about that, we'll come back to that later. Over the years, the regulations got updated. Notably, in the early 2000s, there were some lawsuits that kind of took some legality away from the ADA Act. So in 2008, they had an amendment to that made it a bit stronger. I do want to note in 2006, the DOT made curb ramps. It was required to have detectable warning fields or truncated domes. I'm sorry, detectable warning fields is something from Wisconsin. And then in 2010, we had ADAG. So those are our actual ADA design guidance that we currently use today, especially when it comes to our public right-of-way. Also applies to public entities, also applies to private businesses for those planners and others of you working for developers. Really important to know. And then also forthcoming is PROAG, Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidance. Those are going to have updates for everyone, and it really is trying to get in line with the times, knowing that we have sidewalk level protected bikeways. We've just got a lot more going on within our right of way. We've got landscaping, things of that sort. Note with PROAG, even if you are on private property, but you are serving a public need, you will need truncated domes. So please, if you're doing development, put them in now, because PROAG will get adopted, and then you're already set up for that. PROAG started in 2014, still has not been adopted, but they are anticipating getting that done this year. So those of you who are wanting to watch those ADA meetings, if you watch the March one, you might get an update at that point. So the importance of why do we care about ADA, right? How many of you tried to go walking this weekend outside? Yeah. How many of you had to waddle like a penguin? Yeah, okay. How many of you slipped and fell? I did. I smashed my face. Okay. It was just pure ice, okay, underneath the snow. Now imagine trying to do that without eyesight, or if you're rolling in a wheelchair, or if you have a mobility device like a cane. How comfortable is that, right? That can be pretty limiting as a human, and you might choose not to go places in order to do so. And that's really what we care about when we talk about ADA. We want to make sure that we're designing facilities correctly. And because when we design those facilities correctly, it not only works for people with disabilities, but it works for everyone. No one tell my dad he's in my presentation, okay? He would not be happy, but he's there. And so it works for all ages and abilities, right? You hear this term over and over again. But where we have to start is we really have to understand where our network and our system is at. Because the ADA Act went into law in 1991, we still have facilities out there that were built before then. We have some built between 1991 and 2006 when truncated domes went into effect. So that comes into play when we talk about planning, as well as that requirement to have an ADA transition plan. So understanding our system, doing that analysis, that gets that all into play so that we're set up well to take that into design, get it out, get it working for people living in our neighborhoods. Again, why? 1 in 4 of us have disabilities. They're not always visible. They can be cognitive, they can be vision. It can be something with self-care. You might not be able to wash yourself in the morning and need some help. As something to note in Hennepin County is by 2040, 1 in 3 residents will be over the age of 65. I can tell you that when we age, we start walking a lot more carefully. We start doing things more carefully, and we think about how we get to and from places differently. Not only that, but people with vision impairments, there are different levels of this. I have a minor astigmatism, and I try not to drive at night because when I see headlights coming at me, all I see is a blur, especially some of those really bright ones. And I am still under 40 for now. So it's not just those visible impairments. You have to think about those other disabilities. So the FHWA requirements, this is kind of if you were to go on their website, a lot of words, but it essentially comes down to you want a self-evaluation and inventory, an implementation schedule, how are you going to get it done, and who are the responsible parties. That's Derek. As noted before, an ADA transition plan is required for all public entities with more than 50 employees since 1992. How many of you do work for schools? What does that mean? That means school districts should have ADA transition plans. School districts, school buildings also need to be ADA compliant. That also means when you're milling and overlaying a parking lot. I went down this rabbit hole. I am not an ADA expert, but I went down this rabbit hole with my school district, trying to get a curb ramp to be ADA compliant for new construction. In addition, Title III, that's not a public entity, but it's all other businesses. That applies to those businesses open to the public. And so you still want to make sure your curb ramps are doing well. You've got proper crosswalks, things of that sort. People can navigate your building, etc. So I'm hoping I'm hitting some of the planners in this room, because it all starts in planning, and then it goes into design, and then we construct it. Why are we updating our ADA transition plan now? I will say our probably number one reason is that regional solicitation is coming up, and it will be required for regional solicitation in order for us to get federal funding for projects. It's not the greatest reason to do it, but also we do want to do it. So we have been actively trying to get it updated. And so those of you not familiar with regional solicitation, Met Council provides a bucket of money. We provide applications for various projects. They judge it, and then they come back and tell us if we got money to help assist us get some of our projects done or not. And those ADA transition plans help if they are board adopted. And so we're looking to get ours board adopted. But in the past 10 years at the county, we have made a lot of initiatives toward really thinking about the people that we serve, not only from a driver perspective, but people walking, rolling, biking, using transit, etc. We have our age-friendly Hennepin plan, which was developed in 2021. We have disparity reduction, which has transportation domains where we're really trying to right historic wrongs and say, oh, no one's crossing here, but is there a reason they're not crossing here? Have we done something that maybe they want to cross here? And if there are other ways that we can make that better. We have our climate action plan, which has really strong VMT reduction goals and greenhouse gas reduction goals. And it's going to take a lot for us to get there countywide. And we're currently updating our complete and green streets policy. And we're really excited. We got a grant to do a Toward Zero Deaths action plan this year. So all of those things come together. And if we've got ADA working with those, these things also come along for the ride. In terms of our county plan, what we anticipate use in terms of chapters that we'll have involved, we'll have an accessibility vision, inventory and self-evaluation, which Derek will get to, policies and practices. New to our plan will be methods to remediate. How are we going to upgrade our curb ramps? How are we going to address things like obstructions and defects? Responsible parties and appendices and supporting data. And what do we evaluate with our plan? First and foremost, at a countywide level, we evaluate curb ramps. What's a little more of a gray area is sidewalk defects and obstructions. At a county level, we put this maintenance and responsibility on our partner agencies. So we're going to have to clarify that in our plan and work with our partner agencies to see how we can get some of these updated. And then there's a question, what about APS, accessible pedestrian signals? Those are forthcoming with ProAg. So if ProAg gets adopted, that will be required to be included in our ADA transition plan. So we're working to get our data ducks in a row, if you will, making sure we have all of that information available so that if ProAg gets adopted this year, we can still get it into our plan and we're ready to go. We know how many we have, how many are compliant, how many are not, and how many are needed. Opportunities where we have for those upgrades, smaller projects like maintenance, mill and overlays, operations. Sometimes we do just traffic signal projects, safety projects. Rehabilitation, we're starting to do full depth reclamation. So those are other opportunities to get our curb ramps updated. And then obviously full reconstruction is our best opportunity. We have more play with our elevations to get things to work. Our process, we began these updates back in 2019. We hit a road bump of COVID. So we're now taking those off the shelf. We're making sure our data is compliant and consistent. We're engaging with existing committees with people with disabilities. We'll be doing that kind of throughout the process coming up here. We'll add that remediation chapter. We'll have a 30-day public comment period, so you all know. We'll to make revisions, and we hope for board adoption by October of 2023. I do want to note this process is iterative. We're doing the ADA transition plan now, but then it goes into project scoping, then it goes into design and construction, and then the data gets reported back to us. Then we review that data, and then we update our ADA transition plan again, and this goes over and over and over again. This is a living document. Our map will be consistently updated. So what are elements to consider when it comes to kind of just some best practices and lessons learned that we've learned as a county and we've learned kind of professionally elsewhere? Curb ramps. This is an example. This isn't someone with a mobility device, but they are using a cart to carry groceries or other things. As a county, we aren't looking to do pavers in curb ramps areas anymore. Number one, they're really difficult to keep compliant. But also number two, even if we keep them compliant, there are people who have spinal injuries who might be rolling down our roadways, and they might still feel that jolt in their system, and that is not comfortable for them. Other examples of curb ramps. This one is so close. Okay, to the right is a Dairy Queen, and I talk about ice cream a lot in my presentations. And this to the left is a county road. That's County Road 101. And what this development, when the Dairy Queen kind of redid itself, they did this great access to and from the trail so that people riding their bikes or walking or rolling can get to go get ice cream. And this, I love it. I love the treatment. There's only just one small issue, right? And that's the truncated domes aren't wide enough. Someone could miss them and end up in that motor vehicle way. But I love the thought process behind it, and I like that they were thinking about it. Yep, okay. So here are just examples of some newer construction with those really compliant curb ramps. We were able to get utilities out of the way. We were able to update those elevation defects, things of that sort. Also keep in mind pedestrian refuge islands should also be ADA compliant. What about obstructions and deficiencies? This is Hiawatha, the trail along Hiawatha. You know, it was a good design to begin with. It's just now that there's some grass and weeds kind of growing up in between the cracks, something to take care of as there's been some shifting. This we're going to correct. This is on Franklin Avenue. There's a utility pole smack dab in the middle of the sidewalk. You can see the desire line around it. So someone wheeling through there really cannot get through there. It's just right in the way. And then this example, you know, think about it even during construction, right? There are still people who need to get around when we're doing construction, and having them go way out of their way is not as convenient when you're rolling as it is when you're driving. I will say, Mike, this is my kid. She loved watching this, and these guys were super nice all summer long when they were adding fiber to our neighborhood. And this was her a few days later checking out the fresh concrete. And they really did a nice job leveling everything out with this utility vault. Bike ramps, these are not a part of our county transition plan, but there's something to think about. It is possible that a pedestrian could get in here and not realize that they're entering the motor vehicle way. So consider truncated domes along there. They're not required at this point, but it's probably best practice to really add them. Bikers don't love them, but I like to prioritize ADA over that bike comfort. And what about linear elements with bikeways? These sidewalk level protected bikeways that we have, these are new. They're newer to us. They've been going in other countries, but they're new to Minnesota. They're newer to the United States. Here's Washington Avenue. So questions that I have for you is this a detectable edge? If I have no vision and I am walking along this, can I tell where the bikeway is versus the sidewalk? Yes. No. Okay, it's kind of both, right? So here we have a ramp down and the curb height that reveals itself, that's detectable. But what we learned on a different project in a county and a city that we were, you know, it's on the other side of the river, is that these pavers we thought were detectable to someone underfoot, but they're really not. So we have different tools in our toolbox now. Again, how about this? Detectable edge? Yes? Detectable edge? No. Okay, this one's, you know, again, kind of both. So it kind of depends if someone's walking along here, and this is where the industry hasn't decided yet, what are the amount of vertical elements that have to be between that person walking or rolling and the bikeway in order to be detectable? Jury's still out. Oh, you hit my button. Okay. All right, another example here. And this one, I want to point out the landscaping that we have. Landscaping is absolutely detectable to people walking and rolling. So that's our best thing. It has a bonus because it gives us a green infrastructure benefits. It adds some comfort to people going along the roadway, but I recognize we don't always have the luxury of space to add landscaping. How about this one? Detectable edge. This is 66th Street in Richfield. I really like this one because we tried it. It's not perfect, but we tried it. So it's a little hard to see, but there are tined edges in the concrete between the bikeway and the sidewalk. So we tried to get something in there that would be detectable. It turns out that they're not. You kind of need a little more depth and width between the grooves. But this was one of the first ones out of the gate. And this is a pretty decent job at doing it, okay? And ideally, we're in Minnesota. People will tell someone they're in the bikeway, or they'll kindly say on your right and go around them slowly. How about this? This is again 66th Street. Detectable edge? I'm getting nods for those of you online. Yes, this is very detectable. We've got landscaping so people know where they need to be. All right, so that comes to what happens if we have a bikeway right next to a sidewalk. Can't get landscaping. How do we navigate that? There's something called a tactile guide strip, linear guide strip. You're going to hear different directional indicators. I was told by someone with no vision that it's not directional. It doesn't tell him which way to go. Fair point. Ask Joe Bike Guide will call it directional indicator. So City of Minneapolis is currently experimenting with these. Something to note with these, people with no vision are trained differently. Some are trained to walk on top of them. Some are trained to put their cane between the linear elements. And some people are trained, they just walk nearest to the building because they can hear sounds bounce off of it, so they don't use it at all. That means the key to these, you can see here it's offset 1 foot from the bikeway, because if someone is walking on it, their shoulder stays out of that biker's path. But you also need to be very careful in these placements, because right, if we add landscaping elements, if we add utility poles, you don't want to lead them into those. So you want to wind around. It's totally fine for these to go straight down the center of the sidewalk if you need to. They are a part of the PAR. They meet ADA requirements. Here's an example of just kind of what that looks like at the intersection. This is Hennepin Avenue downtown. You can see that detectable edge. We've got a bike ramp with truncated domes across it, curb ramps. The intersecting pedestrian access routes here, that's still to be determined. The industry is really trying to decide what that should look like. How do we make sure if someone is crossing that they get to that sidewalk and don't inadvertently end up in that bikeway where there isn't that detection? So know that that best practice is forthcoming. And I'll pass it off to you, Derek.
Hey everyone, so I'm going to take over next. So let's see if I can, hold on. Okay, there we go. So my first slide is on the difference between equality and equity. So on the left slide here, we show that we're giving 1 box to everyone. That's equality, we've been fair. But have we really met the needs of the different users? Person on the left here in the, we'll say, pinkish red shirt, obviously the box helps them get higher to look over the fence. But on the second slide, we'll see maybe they didn't need that, or because quite frankly, maybe they don't want to stand on the box. Person in the middle here in the pink shirt, obviously we've given them 1 box. They can now just barely see over the fence, but they're having to stand on their tippy toes, not very comfortable. Third person, we gave them a box again, but person in the wheelchair is probably going, why did you give me that box? It's of no use to me. So equity is really what we're striving for with ADA, is trying to truly understand the needs of each of our different users and using our resources in such a way that better accommodates each of the users. So with the first user, we said they probably don't want the box, they don't need the box, so it's an entity that's not of any use to them. We'll better reallocate those assets to the second person, give the second person 2 boxes. Now they're up high enough they can see comfortably over the fence. They don't have to be on their tippy toes. It's just more comfortable for them. And then the third person, obviously, we built the ramp because we realized that that's what they needed. Now, obviously, this is a very simplistic example, and hopefully everyone gets the concept, but I will show you some pictures in the real world where this concept comes into play, where it does feel like people did more of the left side and not the right side. So the first thing we talk about here, and Casey's talked about, is our ADA transition plan. So let's see, can I get to the link now? Will the link work on the presentation? Oh, yes. So I'm gonna, if I would have used the link on the left side of the slide, it would have brought me to this page here. So you can see this is the county's ADA transition plan web page. You can just type in ADA plan. There's my name. It has all of our information. It shows you how you can file a grievance if you want to file a grievance. And then it goes to the ADA existing ADA plan, which was adopted in 2015. It's a bit old, hence the reason we're updating it. And then it gets to this map here, which is what I'm going to talk about here in a second. But before I go to that, I'm going to first mention a couple things here at the bottom that can be of useful to people. If you hit this plus here, it takes you to our checklist. You can click on some of the links here that'll take you to the different checklists, which I'll get to in a minute too. And then it has contacts again down at the bottom, myself, and then Jamie, who I have to give a big shout out to. She works in our asset management group, and she's the one that maintains a lot of our ADA data that we'll get to in a minute. So if we get back to the map, which is that second link or that middle link in the previous page I just talked about. So we can now zoom in on anything here in the county here and kind of get an idea of what does our current system look like on any particular area. So I'm just gonna go to Broadway here. Obviously here's University, so we're just a little bit north of here. Obviously University isn't a county road in this stretch, so that's why I'm not choosing to go there. But if we look at Lowry, we pull up the legend now here, we can see there's blue dots here that show each of the ped ramps and what condition they're in. So blue dots are good, green dots are generally okay, yellow dots are bad. The things that don't have truncated domes are those tactile warning. And then the red is really bad ramps that are need modifications, and gray are future ramps. There are spots where sometimes we're missing ramps. So then there's the bigger dots here in the center of the intersection that can be usually either green, blue, or gray. So if they're gray, that means we have no APS, accessible pedestrian signals. Green, we have full, and sometimes we have partial that are in blue. You won't see a lot of the light blue or dots. But just as a quick example, so like this intersection here, looks like the quadrants are pretty good. Each of the 4 ped ramps. Looks like there's a connection here to the city street that need upgrade, and we don't have APS. So that's kind of something that KC was talking about, where when that road was constructed, or the ADA work was done, you can see they've done a pretty good job of upgrading the ped ramps. You see a lot of the blue dots at the corners, but only some of the intersections have APS. Maybe this is a newer project that somebody did something on University, but now we're going to have to at some point replace APS there or add APS there. And that's going to be challenging with the existing ramps already there, because in order to put APS in there, we may have to rip up the corner again or parts of the corners again to apply APS. So my advice to you on all of your project is, if you're building pedestrian ramps and it's a signalized intersection and it doesn't have APS, put APS in, because you might think, well, we'll save money. Maybe it's not the full standard yet. We'll come back and do it at a later date. You're going to end up spending more to come back and do it at a later date. So let's get back to the presentation. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to show one other thing here. So these red dots here, or red squares here, and these gray squares here, this is the obstructions and defects. So the sidewalk defects are the red, and the sidewalk obstructions are the gray. So you can click on any of these squares. It'll pop up this box. Seems like it's a little out of view here. Usually you can see the top. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but we'll just click on the image here. So you can see there's some cracking. I think this was a sidewalk obstruction. That pole is maybe not a, or maybe was this a defect, I think? This could be an obstruction, but usually it has to do with the PAR, which Casey mentioned earlier. So PAR stands for pedestrian access route. So from an ADA standpoint, the minimum PAR, pedestrian access route, is 4 feet. So you should always have at least 4 feet on one side of any obstruction. And an obstruction, like I say, could be a pole, hydrant, any of those things. And we'll probably come back to that, but let's go back to the presentation. Okay, there. So let's talk about our ped ramp metrics. So, and this is a little hard to read down at the bottom, but it's got some years down at the bottom there. So on August 15th, we had a little over 12,000 ramps, 12,600 ramps. And the ones in dark blue here were the amount that were compliant, so about 5,500, 5,600. and we had a little over 7,000 that were non-compliant. So we were 44% compliant, 56% non-compliant. And you can see in 8 years of progress, we're now at 68% compliance, 32% non-compliant. So we've increased our compliancy by about 24% over 8 years. That's an average of 3%. If you do the trend line out, and we're at 32% non-compliant right now, you'd think, well, maybe in about 11 years we'll hit our target. Possible, but if I'm being honest with you, that's probably overestimating or being optimistic. And the reason I say that is a lot of what you see here with the number of ramps going up, that's happening mainly because of, like I was talking about, there's missing ped ramps, there's sidewalk that gets added. When we add sidewalk, obviously we're going to add ramps. So there's always seems like there's more to do, I guess is what I'm saying. Plus, as this week was a perfect example of, we have weather conditions, so there's deterioration. So there's nothing that to say that this 44% that was compliant back 8 years ago, or the 68% that are compliant, we're saying today, couldn't become non-compliant because of deterioration and other issues. So just like we maintain our roads, you know, we build a road, and then we don't just say, well, okay, that's our road for the next 100 years. We have to maintain that road. We're going to be experiencing that on 88 too. We're going to be having to maintain the system, but nonetheless, this does show, you know, a considerable amount of progress. But from my standpoint in my role, it's still is, you know, frustrating that 30 years after the ADA law, there are still, you know, at least a third, and when you factor in the number of missing ped ramps, and probably this 68% is a little optimistic, because if we went out there today, we'd probably see some deterioration on these 68%. So anyway, the point being, there's still progress to be made. So here's our APS metrics. We have 820 Hennepin County owned traffic signals on county roads. 244 of them have APS, so we're at about a 30% compliant. Obviously, we're not doing as good as we are with ped ramps, and that's again because of some of the things that Casey mentioned. You know, APS is a newer standard, so it's, you know, slower ramp up, slower process, slower kind of getting all of our ducks in a row to do the work. Plus, for APS, there's obviously issues with signals. You're dealing with, you know, sometimes old signals that may or may not be as conducive to adding APS. If you need to or want to upgrade the signal to work with APS, you know, that's another cost associated with your project, and can make things more challenging, of course. But again, to talk about the trend line, here's 4 years. I don't have the data yet for last year's construction season 2022, so that's why I haven't put this on here yet. But you can see over the years 2018 to 2021, we averaged about 24 APS added, and we need another 576 if you do the math with this. So that's about 24 years out. So like I was mentioning with the ped ramps, if we hit our ped ramp goal by 2040, so that's what, 17 years from now rather than 11 I mentioned, I think that would be a good goal. For APS, I would say we're probably about 10 years behind. But we'll see. I probably won't be working at the county when that happens, but we'll see. We'll see when we get there, but just giving you some idea. So like I said, maybe I would be very surprised if we were completed with APS by 2040, I guess is what I'm saying, to be honest with you. But it's certainly, we have goals and we'll see what we can do, I guess. It all comes down to funding, as we all know. A lot of this comes down to our ADA checklist. So when we do construction projects, and the constructors and the inspectors design and construct the projects, we ask them the inspectors to fill out compliance checklists. So there's a ped ramp compliance checklist, which is on the left. There's an APS compliance checklist that's on the right. Obviously, these are federally required on federally funded projects, but even non-federal projects, anytime curb ramps or APS are done within county right of way, we hope either our staff is doing them, or if it's managed, if the project's being led by a the city or one of our other local partners like MnDOT or the Park Board, whoever the local agency who's the lead agency is filling out these checklists and giving it to us. It's the way for us to document the work that was done. I won't go into all the standards here, but it talks about like landing slopes, running slopes, cross slopes. Those checklists that I showed you back on the previous ADA transition plan, the online link will take you to these compliance checklists, and it'll take you to kind of the write up in the description of all the standards and all the things you're looking for if you were actually filling out these checklists. But probably the most important thing is down here at the bottom. If there are any issues that make it not possible to be compliant, and I'll get into that in a little bit too, that is certainly valid. I mean, obviously our goal is to make everything compliant, but there might be reasons why you can't make it compliant. That could be like a building corner. It could be some type of utility or structure, like sometimes you'll see them at gas stations where if you start digging underground, you might get into contaminated materials. What's that? Oh, okay. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time, but these are your compliance checklists to fill out. So this is what I was talking about with the difference between equality and equity. Somebody built a sidewalk, and I'm assuming that's where the right-of-way line is. So that's why they stopped the sidewalk there. But you can see that's my team, a lot of my teammates. Some of them have moved on. This is a couple-year-old picture. But this is not good. Obviously, in winter conditions, the snow is going to get piled up on the grass in the corner. The sidewalks can become unusable. Even in the winter condition like this, anyone in a wheelchair is going to get to the end of the sidewalk and go, thanks for getting me this far. How do I get to the corner? So point being, if you're doing that and your right-of-way stops there, if that's the county road, which we're getting up to, ask the county. Let's work together to finish that last 40 feet or whatever it is. Here, these are some of the other things we deal with. Natural terrain of the road might be so steep that makes things challenging. You've got utility poles, you've got signal poles. So obviously to add APS on that's going to be very challenging. So again, sometimes you may not be able to make everything compliant, but you do the best you can and you document why something isn't compliant if it can't be. This has the utility box here. Again, that's something that's going to be challenging to get over. I guess I just accidentally skipped a slide for the sake of time. I won't go back to it, but it was just a kinked crosswalk. I don't recommend putting in kinked crosswalks again because of sight impaired people. How does the person who has sight impairment see your kinked crosswalk? Obviously, they're usually there for because you have a raised median in the center and the kinked crosswalk is going around the raised median. I would ask you to look at doing one of two things, either raising or increasing the raised median out further and building a cut through the raised median, or shortening the raised median back and crossing them in front. Obviously, turning templates and that kind of stuff plays into that, but for sake of time and moving on, I'll just say I would ask you to seriously consider that, because if you're trying to build something for all your users, you don't build a kinked crosswalk. We talked about some of the sidewalk defects a little bit. I'll just get into these are some of them: vertical, horizontal discontinuities, spalling, cracking, cross slopes, ponding, vegetation, and vertical slope. This is how we track them with minimal and moderate and severe, depending on how severe, the discontinuity is, so that we can track and try to prioritize the more major ones. Same thing with cross slopes and ponding. Obstructions, again, are utility poles, street lights, traffic signals, signposts, fire hydrants, trees. Anything that's in the sidewalk that's above ground can be an obstruction. Obviously, again, the most important thing to remember there is that PAR, pedestrian access road. Keep at least 4 feet, preferably 5, so that anyone who's in a wheelchair can get around that. Also for sight impaired people. I've been on many field walks, and a couple in particular where I was on field walks with people from Blind Incorporated, which is a company that actually helps people with sight impairment better navigate our community around us. And they're experts who are the ones who are best trained to get around with sight impairments. I've seen them stumble into a lot of these objects. So they aren't just something I say. I see them, they happen. And that's what I would ask you. The next time you're walking on a sidewalk, close your eyes for a little while and see how well you can get through that piece of sidewalk. I think it will be very interesting to you. For costs, and I think this will probably be the last slide I'll talk about for the sake of time, is obviously funding comes into a lot of the work we do. You have to have money to do things. So a lot of the work we do for ADA, or at least that I'm involved in, are tied to our mill and overlays. So we do a mill and overlay, again, to maintain the road. So ADA law tells us that we should also be upgrading the ped ramps, and we try to do the APS too on those corridors. So this is just a kind of an average example of a corridor. Say it's a mile long, it's got 12 intersections. The operations crews are going to pave it, so I'm going to program it into our ADA program. So it's got 12 intersections. Let's say 9 are unsignalized, 3 are signalized. So if there's 12 intersections with 4 quadrants each, that's 48 quadrants. If we say half of the quadrants are non-compliant or missing ramps, we're going to have 24 non-compliant ramps that we're trying to do at $10,000 per quadrant. That's $240,000. If 2 of the 3 signalized intersections don't have APS, which we said were about a third in our earlier slide, $30,000 an intersection, that's another $60,000. That mile of ADA work now just cost you $300,000. If we do 10 to 12 overlays in a year, which is pretty average for us, we're now at $3 to $3.6 million. Plus, we have design fees if we consult out the design work. We have overhead, administrative fees. And here's why I picked these numbers that were kind of convenient is currently right now our ADA budget is at 4.25 million. And about $1 million typically goes to the design fees and the overhead. So I usually have about 3.25 million, give or take. So I kind of gave you an average example. And this, I mean, obviously the corridor could be more, it could be less, but this is an average example of a project that we're working on. And what we'll do is we'll try to lump in as many of the corridors together and then have our bid package. And then if anyone has any questions. Joe, I think, was first.
So you have kind of the ADA compliancy map. What was the effort getting all the data collected?
So the PedRamp part of it and the APS part of it, our asset management that Jamie, the link that I gave to her contact information, they've been doing it every year for longer than I've been with the county, you know. I mean, it's a thing that they do every year to try to maintain our system. Now, they don't go and check every intersection every year, but every time a construction project is done within county right away, they try to update our metrics and update our data so that I can update our metrics. Now, the little red and white dots that or squares that I showed you that were the obstructions and defects, that was done by summer interns the last time in 2019, right before the pandemic. We gave them a GPS unit. They went out there, walked all of our sidewalk over a summer, a team of 2 of them. They'd usually each take one half of the, one side of the street and just walked it and documented every issue they saw. And that's why we gave them that criteria of the mild, severe, so they could document different kinds. That's why we asked them to take a picture too, because what they might see in the field and what I might see in the field might be, seeing it a little differently. So I could look at the pictures and then we can assess anything with the picture. Does that answer your question? Jeremy?
So is there any difference between the major differences between the county's ADA transition plan and like MnDOT's or one of the cities? And
You want to take that one?
Most of them will have all of the same elements, kind of the same chapter headings, if you will. Some of the level of detail might vary. I'd say the biggest thing that varies is the level of engagement that people do with their ADA transition plan and how they document that.
Is your transition plan strictly related to elements?
The question was, does our transition plan only work with, only dedicated to elements within the public right of way? Yes. We have opted to focus just on transportation corridors with our ADA transition plan. Because of those other elements of Title II and Title III, I think it's something we need to think about for our buildings and facilities and other things. We recently added HICRA to the transportation team, so we're going to also incorporate their facilities into ours. So Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority. So they do all of the future light rail corridors that are currently trails. So we're going to get their information into the transition plan as well. But currently we're looking at just kind of street corridors. And like that example by Dairy Queen is not in our plan because that's on private property. Not with our ADA transition plan. What we're doing right now is we're relying a lot on, sorry, I should have repeated the question for those. The question was about outreach that we're doing. That was online. We're not doing like outreach to public entities or things of that sort. What we are going to do is there are existing committees kind of in different, Met Council has some, MnDOT has some. We're going to try to strategically hit some of those committees. So we hear from people with disabilities. And then we'll have that public comment period. I know Minneapolis did a much more robust engagement process with their ADA transition plan. So again, it kind of comes down to the agency. We hear a lot of feedback and input and information on project specific corridors. So we're also trying to take that into account with all of our planning efforts as well.
So Casey, Sandy from the university. So I'm getting mixed messages from our disability resource office. And typically our expert in that office, she said that site private development. Sometimes the university like takes for private, sometimes for public, whichever one works best for us. So she said that tactile domes were not required on private development.
So the question was if tactile domes are not required on private development. Currently, they're not. If ProAg gets adopted, oh no, that's a really good point.
She said there's some transition that because of the maintenance, longevity of those things, she said private development.
It's not required currently. ProAg will require it. I may have misspoke because ProAg is really public rights of way. But I did see some, again, full disclosure, I am not a legal expert. I just go down a lot of rabbit holes researching things because I'm passionate about it. I saw something that said that it would be required with some sort of update coming up. So it's something I can look into, but I think I wonder if I know everyone was tasked with looking at all of the ADA design guidance. So I wonder if there's something coming on that private side. Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer and I don't claim to be one, and I have lawyers within the county that I have lawyer questions to go to. But from an ADA standpoint, my main question would be, if it's a private developer, who is their business intended for? And you can probably guess where I'm leading with this. Are they really trying to build a business that's trying to exclude people? And I hope the answer to that is always no, in which case I realize it's not my money, so I'm spending somebody else's money. So obviously they have to do what's best for their business, but I would recommend that they try to make their business such that they're making it accommodating for all. Because that's actually my experience, how you actually grow your business.
So one of the examples is just ramps. So tactile strips, wandering. So I mean, it's just a big.
So, yep.
So
And this was
it's
why
not
when
a crossing.
here's my thing. I think if you are doing them some places, but not others, you're putting yourself at risk. So be consistent. And then check in with your lawyers as well. Because someone will point out that you're doing it somewhere, but not here with new construction. Why not? Okay. Is there a question online? Can you see that one? Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
This one's directional. Yeah, it's a strip.
Tactile guide strips. Yes.
Yeah. So I've seen them in gray. Is there a requirement for that contrast, just like the panels?
The question is if the tactile guide strips have a visual contrast requirement. They do. So they come in bright yellow. Gray, I'd have to look into whether that is compliant or not, or probably talk to a lawyer. Minneapolis chose to use red because it's a little more natural, but yet still able to meet those requirements from a visibility perspective for someone who might have low vision or some color blindness as well.
They're also used for people with a cane. That's where the tactile part is. The little bumps, sometimes people think they look like Lego blocks. the person with the cane can hit those bumps and see that they're about ready to cross another road, or sense that they're about ready to cross by the vibration of their cane.
I have a question about kind of going above and beyond extra additional costs that might be required in some locations. So in my neighborhood, a head ramp, beautiful head ramp was replaced on a county roadway, but definitely not compliant. And I emailed someone at the county and I got a response back from the county attorney's office. That's how anyone was asking their questions. But in this case, it was clear that like it was not compliant because whoever built the ramp did not want to go on private property to make the grades work. And there wasn't any particular like obstruction on the private property. You would have had one private property. So my question is like, how is the county thinking about cases where there would be this additional cost if this quadrant is to be compliant? There would be additional cost. You have like a rule of thumb or a calculation? How much cost is much cost?
That's obviously a question that would be better asked to our designers, but my experience has been that, especially with newer projects and especially the work we're doing this calendar year, I think we're being, I guess, how do I want to phrase this, more proactive and actually looking to our land acquisition group and acquiring right away and actually delaying the project to, because that's one of the issues. In order to gain access and gain the rights you need to build something on that property, you have to, go through all your land acquisition process, and that just takes time, so that can delay the process. So in the past, I think there's been times where, things aren't necessarily always as black and white as we want. It's kind of a gray area. We could go in, try to make it a little better. We could stay on our property and, do the best we can. And I think sometimes they've maybe kind of erred on just staying within our property. And now I think with some of our newer projects, they're actually looking to utilize that land acquisition tool and actually delay the project and actually, build more. And so I don't know if they have a price determination or if, like I say, it's just the right setting, but so I can't answer that particular part of your question. But I think the overall point is that I think in future projects, I think you'll see maybe a slightly larger scope where that is addressed in a little different fashion.
The other thing we're doing is when properties are developed along county roadways, we've been requesting triangles in each intersection corner that designated right of way so that we can fit the curb ramp in, we can fit all the signal equipment, we can fit utilities. We're trying to do that on an ongoing basis so that we're not purchasing property every single time. But again, we're catching up. And we're not perfect. We're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this role for 5 or 6 years and I still learn things every week or month. Like one of the things I most recently learned is I don't think it's normal or common, but it's more common than I thought that we actually have pedrooms that aren't completely within our right of way. So when they were originally built, they were built on the corner, but then we realized where the right of way is and it doesn't really have as much of the corner as we really thought we did maybe. Or again, I can't speak to why that happened back then, but so that makes it a little tricky for us sometimes now, is trying to upgrade that pedestrian ramp and finding out you do actually need to get some permissions and go through that land acquisition group to actually even reconstruct something that, quote, we think is our asset,
So thank you all for coming out and listening to our presentation. If you have ADA questions, we're happy to answer them. We might not always have the answers, but thank you.
Thank you for coming.